Thank you so much, Jesse. It's a great pleasure to welcome Chad Ford to the Kennedy Center today. Some of you know Chad Ford's work from various places. Some of you have been students of his at BYU Hawaii. Some of you have watched him on the NBA draft. Some of you have read his book. Dangerous Love, Transforming Fear and Conflict at Home, at Work, and in the World, is one of the Kennedy Center's featured titles for this semester, along with Patrick Mason's Proclaim Peace. We do have a few extra books that we will give away today. If you are interested in reading that book and haven't had a chance yet to receive it, we have some books available at the front desk of the Kennedy Center, and we'd be happy to provide you with one as supplies last. If you click on Amazon and you go and search Dangerous Love, you will also find other books about dangerous love that have men ripping their shirts off. And we encourage you to go for the one with these two arrows on it, which will be discussed today. Chad Ford is an international conflict mediator, a facilitator, and a peace educator. He is professor of religious studies with the Heravi Peace Institute at Utah State University, where he's been for the last year. He focuses on conflict resolution and reconciliation, as well as intercultural mediation. In addition to his book, Dangerous Love, he has a new book coming out this year, very shortly, which is titled 70 by 7, Jesus' Path to Conflict Transformation, and it is being published by BYU's Maxwell Institute. He's previously been a fellow at the BYU Maxwell Institute. He was the founding director for the David O. McKay Center for Intercultural Understanding at BYU Hawaii, where he served as the director of that institute that center for 19 years. In his personal life, he also spent 4 years as an NBA analyst for ESPN and figured out how to marry his BYU Hawaii career with being the lead ESPN reporter covering the NBA draft, which he did for 14 years as well. We're really excited to hear from Chad Ford and his wide variety of experiences. We will go today until 1 p.m. He will speak until about 12:45, at which point we will invite you into the discussion and invite your questions. Please join me in welcoming Chad Ford to the Kennedy Center.
Thank you for all that. If you're looking for draft advice, I'm not going to give that today, nor naming books. My publisher was deeply concerned when I named it Dangerous Love that this was what was going to happen. We scanned everywhere. There was no books or anything like it. And then just a year after we published, all the romance novels with the guys ripping their shirts off started coming out. So I like to feel like I started that, but it's not what I mean by Dangerous Love. I'm going to be honest, I changed everything about this presentation about 48 hours ago. I just got back from Jerusalem, where I was working for the last couple of weeks. And I've been working in Jerusalem in the Israeli-Palestinian conflict for 20 years. And I want to talk about that experience of the last 2 weeks today. And you're going to see that I actually slightly changed the title of my presentation. There's a can we now and a question mark at the end, where before there was a much more definitive statement. And that reflects in part what was a really, really rough 2 weeks. This isn't easy. I had to process this over the last couple of weeks, but I'm going to process it with you because I think there's something really important that I took away from that experience that I think is actually critical to peace building, and that's what I want to talk about today. These are photos from Israel. The first is a kibbutz in southern Israel that was attacked on October 7th by Hamas. You can see the absolute devastation there. Around 1,500 people were murdered. Another few hundred were kidnapped as part of this attack. The one on the right is Gaza, and the absolute destruction that happened as Israel invaded Gaza, with over 50,000 people killed and millions displaced, and in a humanitarian crisis. And I've been working on the peace process for 20 years there. And we've had our ups and downs. There's been lots of other skirmishes and wars and different conflicts that are going on, but nothing like what happened on October 7th and the resulting fight in Hamas. And as you can imagine, for the peace process, this was devastating. I was back in Hawaii at the time, and you're literally watching 20 years of work crumble before your eyes, right? People who had been deeply committed to the peace process saying, this is a line too far. I cannot make peace with these people anymore. And when you think about the fact that that's already a small group of people that were even considering coexistence or making peace in the first place, it was devastating. Lots of long Zoom calls and phone calls with people, mostly mourning with them. You know, what do you say to people who come to that sort of conclusion after the sheer amount of hatred and mass violence and destruction that they were witnessing? What do you say to Israelis who their children are all now off to war? Right? Mandatory call-up service with almost everyone in Israel knowing somebody who was in harm's way right now because they were fighting in the war. And what do you say to the Palestinians, right, who are watching their people just being carpet bombed? And the humanitarian crisis. And that's not even talking about what was going on in Jerusalem and the West Bank and other places as well. It was a really, really dark time. I was going back to Jerusalem on a USAID grant. And the mission was a pretty simple one, or a really hard one, depending on how you want to look at it. Gather as many sort of peace, coexistence nonprofits as we can get together. Let's get them all in a space. Let's do some strategic planning together. We've got a ceasefire that's finally in place. How do we rebuild the peace movement in Israel? And 2 days before I left, President Trump put a 90-day freeze on all of the funds that were going to USAID. My trip was canceled. And if you know anything about sort of these small nonprofits that are operating in the area, they don't have 90 days of reserves, right? They don't have a bunch of money sitting in the bank somewhere where, oh, this is no problem, like we're going to be, it was a death knell. I decided I'm going to go anyway. And we're going to try to get together as many people as we can. And so we met in a park. We had no place to go. We couldn't be sponsored anymore, so we ended up in this park. This is with the heads of around 30 sort of nonprofits that operate in Israel and Palestine, and it was such a sobering moment because for many of the organizations, they already weren't functioning. They had already lost their constituency. They had already lost the people who were working in that program and working for peace. So many people had thrown up their hands and said, I'm just not going to do this work anymore. And then on top of that, now we're about a week in by the time that I'm there, so about 7 days sort of after this announcement, it becomes clear USAID is not coming back. This funding isn't coming through. There's not going to be any waivers. And they were looking at, even if we survive the war, we're not going to survive this. Man, it was a painful week because so many of these people had risked their lives and their reputations in their own communities to build peace. The Israelis were not popular among their own people for preaching coexistence with the Palestinians and working on that. There was an anti-normalization movement on the Palestinian side. Some of the people that I worked with on the Palestinian side had gunmen showing up at their homes and threatening their families because they were working with Israelis. And the question became, what do we even do? Our whole work is crumbling before us, and we don't even think we can go back to our communities and get a job right after the work that we did. And on the last day, as I was gathering with some people that I've collaborated with for a really long time, one of my Palestinian closest brothers said to me, I'm not sure the world believes in peace building anymore. I think we are pivoting to a new era where might makes right, right, where the strong will prevail. And I don't know that there's a future for the type of work that we were doing. His words were ringing in my ears all the way to the airport, all the way on the long flight back to Munich, to Washington, D.C., back to Salt Lake, on the drive back up. And I have to say, for me, it became sort of a faith crisis, if you were. Not in my religious faith, though I had some questions for God, for sure, about this. But in the faith that I've thrown my whole career in, which is peace building is possible. We can transform these intractable conflicts. There are absolutely things on the ground that we can do to make a difference. I'm lying in bed at night saying, I don't see a way. I just don't see a way forward. And that was really troubling, really, really troubling to me. There's this moment in the scriptures where this man brings his child to Jesus because Jesus had been healing people, and Jesus asks him, "Do you believe?" And he says, "Yes," but then he pauses and says, "Help me in my unbelief." And I can't tell you how many times I've uttered that phrase over the last couple of weeks, right? Help me in my unbelief. And starting to wrestle with some existential questions, which, by the way, as a conflict mediator, I pretty much hear every day. I'm just now in the position of asking these questions instead of being the one that was being asked those questions, right? What happens when you try your best, but they're still not interested in reciprocating back? What happens when reconciliation feels so one-sided, right? So many people that I work with, whether it's a marital conflict or a community conflict or an organizational conflict. I've been working a lot with religious leaders in interfaith conflict and interfaith conflict. They all have this sort of same pause and question, right? You don't know them the way that I know them. There's not a way forward with this person, or not a way forward with this group or in this community. Yes, I believe in peace building, but not here. Not in this situation, not with this person. And my job for the last 20 years has really been to try to help people actually see, but you're wrong. There's a way. It's absolutely debilitating thinking, though, right? Because when I start to think that there's not a way, three things sort of pop up. Hopelessness, right? There's no hope here. There's nothing that I can do that is going to help this. My boss is a jerk, my partner's a narcissist, my neighbor's a racist, they're never going to change, and it starts to set in that this conflict is never going away. This is something that I have to suffer through. This is my cross to bear. Over time, I was feeling some hopelessness. Fear, right? That we aren't going to make this work and bad things are going to continue to happen. So I'm running, I'm freezing, I'm fighting, I'm doing anything that I can to try to make things better, but everything that I'm doing is actually sort of making things worse. And the part of my brain that is really good at collaborative problem solving is shut down because I'm in fear brain mode, right? The adrenaline's pumping and all I'm really sort of thinking about is survival right now and how to survive. And whether I choose to run or to blame or to freeze or to fight or whatever it is, I'm probably actually making things worse, not better. And man, I thought about running Freezing was probably a great way to sort of describe me, walking around campus at USU a little bit like a zombie with all of my students coming up and say, how's it going? Can we help? What can we do? And I'm like, I have no idea. And then disconnection, this starting to want to separate myself from it and just say, because I can't do anything about it, and because everything that I try is not going to work, I just need to disconnect myself from this process. And I was reminded as I was doing this of the story in the Pearl of Great Price in Moses, where God calls Enoch to do something really powerful. And Enoch's response, man, I've heard myself and so many people say exactly the same thing that Enoch responds to God. Why? Why me? I'm but a lad. I'm slow of speech. The people hate me. Right? Like, I just start to come up with the justifications in my own mind that say, well, if there's going to be peace, it's probably going to have to be somebody else. Look at me. I'm failing at this. I don't have the talent. I don't have the skills. I don't have the ability. If you know the rest of the story, God answers Enoch quite powerfully back, right? And he actually suggests a partnership with Enoch that I think is really powerful. I want to get back to it in a minute. But this sense of hopelessness, fear, disconnection, one of the things that started to occur to me over the last couple of days is this is being human when we're faced with impossible conflict, that these are the sorts of emotions that we're going to feel. I feel a little ashamed, given that I have a career around doing this, that I'm feeling the same thing, but I also just want to be really transparent. That's what I was feeling in the moment. And over the last couple of days, I don't know why exactly. Maybe we'll discover this together. These were the last couple of slides that I put together. My mind has gone back to someone in the New Testament, Peter. And it actually started with a story that actually I bet many of you don't know because it's actually not in the Bible. There are a number of other sort of apocryphal stories of apostles and Peter and whatever. And there's one about Peter that I really, really love. Jesus goes to all of his disciples and he tells them, I want you to carry a stone for me, right? From this town to the next town, and all the apostles go and they pick up a stone, and Peter, being clever, goes and picks up a really small stone, right? I'm going to have to carry this from one place to the other. I'm going to pick a small stone. And as he gets to the next town, Jesus sets them all down and then miraculously turns their stones into bread for supper that night. And as you can imagine, some of the bigger stones got a bigger piece of bread. Peter got a morsel. He was really frustrated with that, and now he's hungry. And Jesus says, okay, second chance. Carry a stone for me again to the next village. So Peter goes and finds the biggest boulder that he can actually physically carry as he's going to carry it to the next town. And he's laboring and struggling to get this rock. He's also even hungrier now. And when he gets to this place at the lake, Jesus says, now with these stones, cast them into the lake. Right? And Peter's, oh my gosh, again. And he sits down and waits for supper. There's no supper. Right? And he gets frustrated at Jesus. Peter gets frustrated at Jesus a lot because, frankly, Jesus says a lot of frustrating and actually really hard things, right? And after he gets frustrated and asks Jesus sort of why, Jesus says, don't you remember what I asked you to do? Who were you carrying the stone for? Right? A lot of times, I think I can get caught up in carrying the stone and thinking about sort of my success or what it's for and forgetting who it is when we're doing peace building work that we're actually carrying the stone for. Right? Peter got this mixed up and confused. I get it confused all the time. But that's not the end. And by the way, I love Peter because Peter actually gets to be really human in the scriptures. And I think he represents all of us in certain ways by the sorts of things he does. But let's just do some highlights of Peter, right? Jesus asked his apostles to go and cure someone of devils and to cast out devils. Peter can't do it. And then Jesus comes and does it, and he goes and confronts Jesus about it. How did you do it? And Jesus says, because you have so little faith, right? A rebuke of Peter, and a question like sometimes the hang-up is that we just don't believe, right? That unbelief is the thing that's keeping us from doing the work. He gets impatient. Jesus is talking about people slapping you on the cheek and turning the other cheek. And at some point, he's like, okay, whoa. We got to put some limitations on this. We've got to put some parameters around it. How about 7 times, right? How about 7 times is the sort of upper limit of forgiveness, to which Jesus responds, 70 times 7. Peter, it's until you're reconciled, right? It's not 1 time, 3 times, 5 times. It's until it's done. It's until it's done. Man, peace-building work takes a lot of time and a lot of patience. There are moments when it feels like I'm getting into the hundreds or the 200s or the 300s now. It's hard to be patient. Sometimes when we're at our end, it's like maybe the sword is the better answer. So Jesus is confronted, he's arrested, and what does Peter do? After all his talk about love or whatever, he pulls out the sword and he lops off the soldier's ear, to which Jesus then takes the ear, heals the soldier, and tells him, for all who draw the sword will die by the sword, and then reminds Peter, if I wanted to use violence, I've got legions of my Father's angels by my side. This is not the way. Have you ever been so frustrated in conflict, it's just like, I'm going to bulldoze my way through this. I'm just, they're not cooperating, so now I'm just going to use force as the way forward. Peter learns a really valuable lesson for Jesus there. What about fear? When Jesus is arrested, right? And it looks like maybe the apostles are going to be suffering the same fate as Jesus. Jesus predicts this. Peter says it's not going to happen. And then 3 times he's confronted and asked about his association with Jesus, and simply says, I do not know the man. I do not know the man. Right? Sometimes it's fear that's holding us back. What will happen to me if I do this thing? If I take this stand, if I do this sort of work? I feel a lot of fear. And then finally, comfort. After all of this is done, and Peter and the apostles actually lock themselves in a room right in Jerusalem to try to protect themselves, they decide, let's go back to Galilee and let's start fishing again. And Jesus has to appear to them again in Galilee a second time, and asked annoyingly to Peter 3 times, do you love these fish more than you love me? To which Peter gets more and more frustrated, saying, Lord, you know I love you. And then he says, feed my lambs. Peace building is never comfortable. It puts us out of our comfort zones. It asks us to do really, really hard things. And sometimes it just feels so much better to go fishing, right? Than to step into something dangerous or unknown. John Paul Lederach starts to give us a way out of this sort of mindset of fear that gets in our way. He's a Mennonite. He's done incredible work. He worked at the Kroc Center at Notre Dame for a number of years. He writes a book called The Moral Imagination, which is one of my favorite books. And he has this sort of definition of what needs to change if you're going to have really transformative conflict. And he gives us basically 4 things. 1, you have to understand that we're in relationship. What happens to one person happens to me. You have to be able to see that there's no way out of this conflict alone, right? We have to be in relationship. The next thing is that we have to be able to practice curiosity. We have to not have all the answers. We have to keep asking questions. When we run into dead ends, we need to keep asking again and again and again. Help us find the way. We have to believe in the creative act, that actually peace building is creative in nature. It's us coming together and collaborating to solve problems together, and that we have to believe that the best sorts of solutions come from the creative parts of our brain. And finally, you have to take the risk. You have to step into the unknown. You have to be willing to do things without understanding necessarily how people are going to react or what is going to happen. You have to put yourself out there. I believe, by the way, Peter does all of this. It takes him a while. It takes him 3 years. It takes that encounter on the shores of Galilee a second time to do some sort of fundamental transformation of Peter. For him to recognize that peacemakers are waymakers. They make a way out of no way. They are not overcome by evil, but they overcome evil with good. So here's Peter, Acts 5. Very different representation of him than you hear in the Gospels. One of the coolest representations of anybody in Scriptures, by the way, in Acts 5. People brought their sick into the streets and laid them on beds and mats so that at least Peter's shadow might fall on some of them as he passed by, and all of them were healed. Here's Peter the doubt, Peter the person who's afraid, Peter who's choosing comfort, Peter who is selfish at times, now at a place where the power of his priesthood is so strong that people say, if you're just in the shadow of Peter, you are healed. It's making a way out of no way. And so my book 70 times 7 that's coming out, I suggest 4 ways where we can overcome that sort of fear and get to that space. Loving our enemies, right? Fear causes us to hate our enemies. Rolling away our stones. Quit throwing stones at the people that we're in conflict with and actually sort of think about how do we roll that blame and that justification away. Taking the risk of embrace, being the first one to open up our arms and invite our enemies into embrace. And then doing the sacred work of sort of restoration, right? Which is not just the restoration of the church or the gospel, but the restoration of us to each other, which I think is really, really important to God. So I want to talk to you about 2 waymakers in the last couple of minutes here. This is Yaqub Tuki. He's a Palestinian. I met him the first time on my first visit to USAID about 15 years ago. I was coming to pitch them on an innovative basketball program that we'd been working on. We were bringing together Israelis and Palestinians to the game of basketball. We were looking for funding. We had some research that was telling us that some really powerful things were happening. I had this awesome presentation prepared. I go up to their offices in Tel Aviv. I'm making this pitch. I'm not even asking for that much money. I'm asking for $20,000, which is not a lot for USAID at the time. And I get laughed out of the room. Basketball, oh yeah, that's going to really solve our problems in the Middle East. I mean, I was absolutely mocked out of the room. And I was quite depressed. But as I was leaving, Yaqub, who was a Palestinian who was working in the local office there, followed me out, put his arm around me and said, I think that might actually work in my neighborhood. I can't offer you any money, but what if I volunteered to be a coach? Could you use some help? We were like, absolutely, we could use anything that we can use. And Yaqub was so infectious. He gathered together a group of Palestinians and Israelis in his community. He started a program there, and then he started to do the awesome work of peacemaking. He started telling his bosses at USAID, you should just come along to practice sometime. Just sort of check it out. Like, there's some really cool things happening. And slowly people from the staff would start to filter in. Then when the U.S. ambassador to Israel visited, he said, come by. And when he got there, he had a jersey and basketball shoes. He figured out his size ahead of time and shorts for the ambassador. He said, just go play with the kids for a little bit. Like, I think that will be better. Pretty soon the ambassador's out there running around, playing with the kids. We got our first grant from USAID shortly afterwards. And over the course of the last 15 years, around $15 million coming to our program from USAID. Because Yaqub had the moral imagination to see the possible when other people saw wasn't possible. When October 7th happened, Jakob was as worried as anybody else about what to do. And he called me one day and he said, I'm thinking about volunteering for the Red Star of David, which is very similar to the Red Cross, as an ambulance driver. I want Israelis to know that I care about them as well. I want to help. He volunteered. And about 6 months into his volunteer work, he was in an Israeli neighborhood. Tensions were high. Some people noticed that he looked Palestinian, not Israeli. He got out of the car to try to talk with them. People got angry. Someone pulled out a gun, and they shot him and killed him. It was devastating for me and for so many people in the program to see this happen. Waymaking is hard sometimes. Sometimes the costs are unimaginable. But the inspiration that he became for many people, including people in that community who, when they started to hear his story and they started to hear who this man actually was and what he was doing, it created some really powerful spaces for us to rethink how we were seeing and treating each other. And this is a bunch of 10-year-old girls that are Palestinian. And I want to tell you a quick story about them. About 2 years into volunteering, working for Peace Players, which was this basketball organization, there was another war in Gaza. This was around 2007. And we were a fledgling organization. We were just had young boys in the process. We weren't working with girls in part because we had some sort of religious challenges to sort of work, especially with Palestinian girls. And the war caused deep tensions among so many sort of people and families in the organization that one by one they started dropping off. Families started pulling their kids out. There was a really traumatic incident that happened with one of our coaches where she threatened some of the other family after one of her children had been killed in the conflict. And then everyone left. I flew out from Hawaii. I went to gather all the families together to try to see if there was a way to salvage this 2 years of work. No one shows up. I served a mission. I know what good missionaries do next. I went door to door. I went door to door these families relentlessly trying to lobby them at their families to come back and work. And one by one, they closed those doors in my face. And after several days, that hopelessness, that fear, that disconnection started coming. I just started teaching at BYU Hawaii. My students were emailing me from Hawaii. How's it going? Is everything back on track? I didn't want to respond to any of the emails. It was looking quite awful. And one day my Palestinian partner comes to me and says, hey, I got a group that really wants to talk to you. I think we can make this work. And we go into the gym with these girls. They weren't wearing Peace Players jerseys at the time. He said, just do your little workshop with them. It'll be great. They have fun. They talk about their family. They talk a little bit about their parents, some conflicts there. When it's done, I'm like, that was cute and sweet. But then after 2 days, no more work. And the Palestinian family that I was staying with decided to say goodbye. Right? Like this is a forever sort of goodbye. Had a little going away party for me. And on the night that I was there, about midnight, they said that the chief of their village wanted to come and meet me. And so we're out there, we're up on a rooftop in this little village of Beisafafa. And this chief comes in and he's agitated and he's speaking in rapid Arabic and my Arabic's too bad to follow along. And I'm like, oh, this is the worst end of this trip ever. Now this guy's yelling at me and he's pointing and his arms are waving around. And when the translation comes, I'm surprised at what he's saying. He says, I'm the new chief in the village. The old chief died. And I have many responsibilities. It keeps me out late at night. And my wife is insanely jealous. She thinks that all the women in the village actually want to sleep with me and that I'm actually out having affairs at night. And every night when I get home, we're having this big conflict. So I'm coming to you to ask you a question. Am I in the box or am I out of the box with my wife? That was the translation. I honestly thought it was a joke, and I made a big joke back to him at first, but then it became clear that he was actually serious. So we're standing on this rooftop until like 2 o'clock in the morning, and I'm teaching some basic principles out of the Arbinger Institute, Anatomy of Peace, to him, and he has this epiphany at one moment. He's like, this is what the Israelis and Palestinians are doing to each other. We're seeing each other as objects. We're not working together. We're not making peace. And he says, you need to come back to our village. I want you to teach everybody in my village this. Well, I tell him the story about what's happened over the last couple of weeks. There is no program. I don't really know that I'm coming back. He says, you need to come back. And he looks at his watch. He's like, oh my gosh, it's 2:00. I'm ready to have another huge fight with my wife. He gets ready to leave. I walk into his car and I said, look, I've been thinking about something all night since you showed up. I just want to ask you this question. Where did you hear that phrase? Maybe it was just a translation thing. Am I in the box or am I out of the box with my wife? He said, I have a 10-year-old daughter. And she had not been speaking to my wife for months now. She wants to follow a more modern path. My wife is very traditional Muslim. They've been fighting. They quit speaking. You have to understand, as Muslim, families are the most important thing. I didn't know what to do. I was so frustrated. After your workshop, she came home. She put her arms around my wife, said, I'm sorry I've been in the box with you. We reconciled, and I've been looking for you for the last couple of days. Come back to our village. And we came back, and we started 2.0 with this group of Palestinian girls. One of these girls was the first Palestinian ever to play on the Israeli national team. This group of girls were the first mixed team ever to play in the Israel League, and they won the championship in 2015. It made headline news in the Jerusalem Post. These girls have played basketball in the White House with Barack Obama. They have spoken in London and Germany and around the world as ambassadors to peace. And this girl at the top, Doha, was with me on my last day in Jerusalem. She's now the program director for Peace Players Jerusalem. She's married. She's 36 months pregnant. This is 18 years later. And she'd gather together a group of young girls for me to do the same workshop with on the last day. And as we sit together and she talked about how afraid she was and how scared she was, she also reminded me of something that I had told her a few years ago. This is a Palestinian Muslim, by the way, that remembered this little conversation from a passage in the Mishnah. Do not be daunted by the enormity of the world's grief. Do justly now. Love mercy now. Walk humbly now. You are not obligated to complete the work, but neither are you free to abandon it. She simply told me, I'm not giving up. I'm scared. I don't know what's going to happen, but my life is on a completely different trajectory. I'm not giving up. And it reminded me of this quote from Eric Fromm. To have faith means to dare, to think the unthinkable, yet to act within the limits of the realistically possible. It is the paradoxical hope to expect the Messiah every day, yet not to lose heart when he has not come at the appointed hour. This hope is not passive and it is not patient. On the contrary, it is impatient and active, looking for every possibility of action. So I want to share with you the 3 questions I've been asking myself for the last 3 days. And I want to end with, if you could ask yourself these same questions. You're here, I'm assuming, because you're interested in peace building. You're here, I'm hoping, because maybe you heard President Nelson's call for us to be better peace builders. So here's the questions I've been asking myself the next 3 days. Maybe you can ask them of yourself with me. What challenge do you feel called to engage? What is the thing that you as an individual feel called to do? What from your faith tradition actually compels you to act? What is it about your faith that invites you to not just think about the call and hear the call, but to go forward and actually do the call? And then finally, how are you moving Jesus's and President Nelson's call to be peacemakers forward? What specifically are you doing? Who are you carrying the stone for? Who are the people that are in conflict with each other? They are God's children. They are our brothers and sisters. This is His work. Are we carrying the stone for Him? And for those of you that feel overwhelmed, like I feel overwhelmed right now, and don't even know where to start, I want to end with one of my favorite poems from David White. Start close in. Don't take the second step or the third. Start with the first thing, close in, the step you don't want to take. If you don't know where to begin, begin with a family member. Begin with somebody in your ward. Begin with somebody in your community, someone close in, somewhere you can actually move the needle in the conflict, and let it go. Let it grow from there. This is the book, 70 times 7. I try to get into a lot more of that there. I think it's probably time to open up for questions. Book's coming out April 7th. It's not quite ready to pre-order yet, but soon.